And I have two confessions to make. So I first met you in AEC Tech New York few years ago. I had a great time interacting with you. And second, during my masters, when I was learning coding and architecture, I first discovered your GitHub repo and you were doing some experiments in Vue. And I found your code sandbox and Medium article. And I literally went through each and every project of yours. Like, how is this guy thinking such amazing ideas? And like, it was like totally new way you were connecting things and building tools. So I thought, okay, I gotta have him on the show. So thanks a lot for doing this.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. That's a heck of an intro, I gotta say. I don't know if I've had a better introduction ever, but no, thanks for having me. I'm really excited. Yeah.
I see. So, uh, for people who don't know about you, you had a journey from like technologies to strategy and everything. Like, what would be your like top three career highlights?
Mm. Top three career highlights. That's a great and difficult question. There's been a lot of really, really good moments, I think, for sure. Um, Top career highlights, man. I think I definitely have to highlight, starting with Kieran Timberlake. We've done some really, really cool things there. I got a chance to work on a number of different projects and not just buildings, honestly, software as well. At the time, we were developing Tally, which is a tool for life cycle assessment and embodied carbon. But specifically there, we worked on a project which actually recently won an AIA award, which was student housing for the University of Seattle. It was a really difficult project. And it's actually one of the projects that kind of turned me to technology, believe it or not, because we had some really difficult legal zoning problems to solve. And we were all kind of, working manually in spreadsheets and things to basically figure out how to optimize space and pass the legal requirements. And that was one of the first things that I kind of automated, which then set me on this journey. So that's definitely one super big highlight. Also want to highlight my time at NBBJ. I think again we got a chance to work on so many cool different projects of all kinds, and it was primarily healthcare, but also a lot of other things that I'll highlight there. We worked on a set of software internal to the company called the Applied Science Toolkit, which was a really cool experience. Basically, we were working with experts in the field outside of architecture. I How do we even say this? I mean, one of our experts was a psychologist, and just to kind of give you an example of the diversity of people that we work with, but he would kind of help us understand how his field is relevant to architecture and how we could apply learnings from that domain, that field, to make better spaces. And particularly relevant, I think, for hospitals and healthcare, because you want to create environments that help people heal, and really promote a sense of well-being. So it's challenging for sure, turning in this kind of theory and knowledge into something practicable, applicable, measurable, and in the end putting this all into software. But I would definitely highlight that as a major career highlight as well. Last but not least, I'll highlight here what we've been able to do at Chaos. So I originally actually joined Andscape, and Andscape and Chaos merged a couple of years ago. But I think that for me was a big highlight, which was working on that merger itself, because we had so many complementary products and technologies, and now we have a chance to bring those together and really create something unique that I think doesn't exist, and it could really help designers um, throughout the whole process, from design to decision making to storytelling. And it's a really, unique opportunity. So I'm really, really proud of having been able to do that. Yeah.
That's amazing. And like all these firms are like top in the industry doing amazing work. And like it made me like curious, like so you had different roles in when you had the opportunity to pivot from one role to another. Like how do you decide okay what's good for you and not? Like how do you make those kind of decisions?
That's always a difficult decision. And I don't think that there's ever maybe a clear right and a wrong, or if there is, those cases are rare. It's more a question of what problems can I deal with? What opportunities am I looking for? Because nothing is perfect, right? Everything comes with its own challenges and opportunities. But I think for me, what was really important is just to be self-reflective and as honest as possible. So, to give you a good example, at when I was at Kieran Timberlake, and I was surrounded by all these absolutely incredible architects, talented, intelligent, beyond all belief, some of the smartest people I've ever worked with. One of the things that I really had to admit to myself is that there's a lot of people that are better than me at being an architect. And then I had to ask myself, okay, well, what is the best thing that I could do to support the industry regardless? And for me, that was technology. And it, I guess in my case, I would say that it's worked out very well. It continues to work out very well. But it was really founded in that process of, yeah, looking inwards and being honest with yourself and being able to confidently say, okay, this is what I'm good at, but maybe this is what I'm not so good at, and then there's other people better than me. So let's figure out a way to get the most out of working together.
Oh man, yeah. Like sometimes I have such self-reflection moments. Okay, I like this, but like that ikigai circles of what you love, what you're great at, and what value you can provide to the world, and it's great to hear. And you are like based on the technical expertise, you were building stuff, and I wonder like when you were starting, who were the people who inspired you to build, or who were your mentors and ecosystem?
Yeah, there's so many. It's honestly, I mean, I could list off names here for hours, but I guess I do want to preface by saying that, without these people that did a lot of these things before me, I wouldn't be where I am today. I wouldn't even be close. Um, for me, in the very early days, I mean, everybody knows, I think, or most people know the names of Andrew Human, Brian Ringley. I think there were some of the people paving the way, some of the first people paving the way in terms of bringing technology into the design process. And I was quite lucky in that respect, in that Brian at least was in the University of Cincinnati during the same time that I was, so I overlapped a little bit. And even kind of his influence was so strong that even if you weren't, in the same class or the same curriculum as him, like, he had an impact over
Mm.
the really the entire, not just the faculty but the student body. It's anyway. But I would say him and Andrew Human for sure, and not just kind of the theoretical side of things that they were talking about, but really what they were doing. I mean, Andrew was pushing out actual tools that you can create, you can use, you can work with. So they were maybe some of my first introduction. And then at the same event that you mentioned, which is my favorite tech event in AEC, Thornton Thomas Eddy's AEC Tech, I went there for the first time. I forget if it was 2016 or 17, but then I met Nate Holland from NBBJ. He's still there, and Mark Seep, who was at the time at NBBJ. Now he's working at Gensler, I believe, with Joseph. But and again, it was one of those opportunities where I saw the level that these people were working at. It was so far ahead of where I was. But I kind of looked at it and I was like, well, this is where I want to be. This is where I want to get to. And that was also part of well, not part of, maybe largely influenced me into then going to NBBJ to be able to work with them and learn from them, which I did, and I'm very glad. But yeah, I'd say these folks maybe were some of the most influential. Again, I could rattle off names here for days. There's just so many people. But to anybody listening, I do really want to highlight that the community aspect is so valuable and important to this little niche that we're in, that if you have an opportunity to give back or to share, it's really worth it.
Yeah, like sometimes I see the type of projects, hackathon projects produced in AC Tech, and it's like it brings so many great people around, and people are building things that pushes the boundary.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Any hackathon or project you recall?
There's I recall a lot of good ones. The there's this thing that's always stuck with me to this day. I've been to a lot of hackathons. I think they're fantastic events. I've even been lucky enough to win a couple with the teams that I was. The one that I've never won is the Thornton Tomasetti one, which is like it's always this it's a thorn in my side. But the first year I was there, we worked on something really, really cool. And again, this was 2016, 2017. So this was really before all of the AI hype. The AI hype was ramping up, but it was really completely in a different ballpark than it is today. And the project that we worked on was essentially creating some machine learning algorithms that would tell you the date of construction for a building just based on geometry alone, right? No other information, nothing about materials, nothing about decoration, whatever, nothing. No, just literally like here's a volume. Tell me what year this was built in. And it was a really, really interesting experience. I mean, we tried a lot of different approaches. We got something that worked pretty darn well, and we worked with the 3D model of New York, which was I think yeah, just a fantastic data set, right? Because New York is so diverse, it's so rich. There's old buildings, new buildings. Um, but yeah, that project, it was my first hackathon, but I think to this day it really stands out as yeah, one of the coolest hackathon projects that I've ever done. We didn't win, unfortunately. I forgot what won this year. I thought for sure we would at least come close, and then I was like, oh, come on. But it was fun working with the team. It was a really, really, really cool team. Nate Holland, Mark Seep that I mentioned before, Margaret Wang. I'm not sure if she's still at Thornton Tomasetti, but she was at the time. And just, yeah, great people.
Yeah, and the bonding even that happens during the hackathon is amazing. So
It is, yeah. And those are connections that stay with you, forever. If, of course, if you put in the time to keep them up, but there really are valuable connections, and some of these people, I actually most of them I'm still in touch with. Every now and then we, trade swap some stories, share some stuff, interesting stuff. Yeah.
I see. So you have done various things, and people who are listening and wants to get idea what are the types of automations you did in the design and construction industry. Can you share examples?
Yeah. I mean, I think the use case, it's really use case dependent, right? So I can definitely share some interesting examples. When I was at Kieran Timberlake, we had I mean that practice is unique in a lot of different ways. Really, really a fantastic approach to I think architecture in general. And one of the facets that makes it that way was the fact that we were very close to fabrication. I mean, in the building, the office itself, we have a fabrication lab. We have CNC machines, laser cutters. We have hand tools. We have everything. So a lot of the times what we would do is we would draw something on paper, yeah, but then go literally make it and prototype it and make sure everything's working. So worked on a number of interesting things there that kind of had an overlap with technology. I think one was, I believe this was for New York University. We were doing a large building there, mixed use building for them, and I was working on this kind of a sound dampening panel, but it was also supposed to be, attractive, appealing, because it's kind of, it's in the main lobby. You don't want people to run into ACT ceiling or something like that when they enter the lobby of NYU. And we we had an idea of what it wanted to be. We wanted to resemble these sound waves because it was the School of Music, et cetera, et cetera. It wanted to be out of wood. Okay, so all of a sudden we're talking curvature, we're talking wood. It's getting complexer and complexer, right? So, and I worked very closely on this algorithm with Christopher Connick, who's there. He's still the director of design computation there. Brilliant fellow. But together, basically, we created this script that would allow us to control different parameters of that geometry and then output fabrication ready geometry. So then, it was, I won't say seamless, but it was a much smoother process when we engaged the firm that's actually going to build this. We were able to give them, watertight, buildable geometry that they could put into their CNC software and do it for us. And I think that was a fantastic example of something that really would not have been possible if we didn't have technology, if we didn't have some kind of automation. There's just no way any of us could have designed that and built it. Yeah.
I see. And What are some ideas you wish you wanted to automate?
Hmm. Oh, there's no shortage of those. I think if you look at architecture or design or construction, really any part of that process, I think there's a lot of things that are rule based, and that's not a bad thing, right? Because the rules exist for a reason. Like building codes exist for a reason, to make sure that we're safe and healthy in these spaces that we're creating. But I think a lot of those things can definitely be automated. It's difficult. It sounds easy, but I'll give you a perfect example. In the U.S., we have a series of laws called the Americans with Disabilities Act. Very important set of laws, in my opinion, because they make sure that any kind of person with any kind of a body can access a space, right? And a lot of that is rule based. Again, and those rules exist for a reason. There are standard measurements for turning radiuses of a wheelchair. There's standard measurements for all kinds of things. So but checking for that as an architect is typically very, very difficult, right? It's not only very difficult, but you want to be sure that you don't make a mistake, because otherwise you have a space that's inaccessible. You might even have a legal case on your hands. And I think that's really one good example. But we could apply that to a number of building codes, whether it be zoning, whether it be fire protection. Again, things that are important for the safety and well-being of people. But I mean, we as humans, we make mistakes. I don't care how experienced of an architect you are. When it's 2 a.m. and you're trying to finish up some red lines, yeah, it's very easy to miss a little dimension string, and then you're in a position which is potentially dangerous for the occupants of the building. So I think that's definitely prime. And the other example I'll highlight is a lot of things that have to do with just the fabrication process. I mean, the example I gave at Kieran Timberlake is a good example, but there's a lot of things I think. I mean, as architects, we're still used to deliver PDFs and drawings. Some parts of the world are a little bit more advanced. The Nordics here in Europe. I'm based in Germany, but the Nordics aren't too far away, and they're a little bit ahead of that curve, and they're creating a lot of efficiency, saving a lot of time by working in 3 dimensions, and making sure that what they design is going to be constructed correctly, efficiently, and effectively. So I think there's a lot of opportunities there, and the rest of the world really can and should look to the Nordics as a good example of what is possible today, not the future, but literally today.
Interesting. Well, like I really like the example of, because it's rule based and which could be plugged into a web app, a Grasshopper script, whatever you're comfortable
Yeah,
building. Yeah.
exactly.
Anything which is non-rule based with AI is which is possible now, which wasn't possible before.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think what's cool about AI is I think it gives you what I would call the capacity to automate a qualitative domain. That's a mouthful of words, but if I think of rule based parameters, those I would call quantitative. How far away is whatever, a handrail or something? That's a number. That's something that you can quantify. And in those building codes that I mentioned, ADA, for example, those numbers are hard coded. This is the range. This is acceptable. Great. You can put that in a spreadsheet and get an output. But qualitative is something that I think without any kind of artificial intelligence, or intelligence in general, be it human or artificial, it's really hard to, yeah, to summarize, to quantify, to make an assessment of, like, to look at a space and say, is this beautiful? Or to look at a painting and say, is this beautiful? How does it make you feel? So I think still today we're not quite there yet. I mean, again, I know there's a lot of hype and buzz around AI. We at Chaos are doing a lot with AI. Everybody's doing a lot of things. um, but I think the most exciting stuff is yet to come. I really don't think we've hit that peak yet, that critical mass. And again, when we go to this qualitative side and think of how can we build, not how can we replace the artist, but how can we build a better paintbrush? And I think you
Mm,
see some examples of that already. Adobe's a really good example. They're adding, you know, these tools that help you work with the content. They're not replacing your creativity. They're helping you augment your creativity. Um, so yeah, and personally, I don't know, amateur photographer and former artist, I do use a lot of those tools from Adobe, and it does save me time. It helps me be more effective, right? So and I don't know, I think it's a matter of time before these similar kinds of utilities reach the AEC segment for sure.
Yes. Uh, I got like excited when you said like this AI yet to come is gonna like empower or make a lot of like. Can you dive a bit deeper what you mean by the?
Well, I think, yeah, I'll try and explain. I think so. Today, if you look at the ecosystem of AI tools in AAC, there's no shortage of them. And I think a lot of them are exciting. But I also like when I talk to customers, when I talk to just people in the industry in general, and you ask them, how much of this are you using? When I say using, I mean how much of this are you applying to billable work, to projects that you are getting paid for, and to output that you're getting paid for and will be built in the real world. And then, the answer kind of diminishes. It's like, oh well, we've been playing with it. This is my favorite phrase that I hear from architects when I say, "What are you doing with AI?" I'm like, "Oh, we're playing with it." Okay, and there's nothing wrong with that, of course, absolutely nothing wrong. Um, but what I guess what I mean to say is like we're still far from the point where you know for me, at least my opinion, we're still far from the point where it's not just a toy, but when it becomes like a business critical thing. And I'll give a historical example too, because I was in the industry when the BIM revolution was kind of starting, and but it was the same thing then. We were all in CAD, we were all drawing in 2D, and when these BIM tools started coming out, it was exactly that. At first, we were playing with them. We were using them on small projects, low risk things. Maybe we weren't even using it to output construction documents. We were playing with it. But now you look at a big market like North America. I mean, that's the standard. Everybody's using a Revit or a Vectorworks or an ArchiCAD. That is the standard. It is now a yeah, it's just the status quo, right? So that's kind of what I mean with AI is I think we're still far from that point where everybody is using it, and not just using it, but they consider it mission critical. And I think
Mm,
this is for me maybe the most important part, because if I don't know, if I was still working in a North American architecture firm, let's say NBBJ, if one day you walk into the office and Revit doesn't work, right? That's it. You cannot do your job. You just simply
mm,
cannot do your job as an architect. But if I walk into that same office and my AI tool doesn't work, whatever it might be, I can probably still do my job.
mm.
So that's kind of what I mean. But I do think it's coming. It's the technology is evolving. The use cases are expanding, and I do think we'll get to that point where it will be mission critical.
I see. Yeah, it's like in startup I often hear, okay, it's good to have versus like you can't live without your solution. In
Hmm.
regarding the like architects coding, like you're just playing for this adoption, do you think that AI models are not there yet, or there are not enough AI models fine tuned to the architecture industry, or we don't have easy to use integration within the design workflows? Like,
Hmm. Yeah, that's a very, I think, important topic that people overlook is maybe not the wrong word, but it's not at the forefront of people's minds. Personally, my opinion is that there's not enough AEC specific models and data sets out there, and there's several reasons for it. I mean, first off, I think it's worth starting with the fact that the availability of data, right? So as an architect, and again, I mean, most of my experience is in the US a little bit. I've worked as an architect here in Germany as well, but not as much. The point is that, when you create something as an architect, it is the property of the client. It's not my property, it's the client's property. So, if I was to today go about collecting training data for a data set, it's difficult, right? Because it's not about me going to NBBJ and saying, "Hey, can I use your designs?" NBBJ might say, "Well, we say yes, but we have to ask all of the clients," right? And then all of a sudden, it becomes a much more complicated thing, because a firm, especially a large one, has tons of clients. Some have privacy concerns. Of course, if you're working on things like airports, government infrastructure, and so what I'm trying to say is that there's a lot of filters in this process, and even if you were to run through all the filters, you'd be left with like a very very small data set, which I think in the world of AI might just not be sufficient because it's biased. It's just not enough, right? We all know the phrase "garbage in, garbage out." So um, yeah, and but I think that's part of the problem. Maybe this will change in the future. Maybe it won't, or maybe we don't need as specific models as we think we do. And I think time will tell. But my personal opinion is when I look at the technology today, is that the use cases really are very very domain specific. Um, so yeah, but let's see. Let's see. Again, I think in terms of the AEC constraint, it's still there's a lot more room to grow. So it'll be interesting to watch the next couple of years.
I see. And like this point, actually, I want to do something. Like time and time, I hear discussions on LinkedIn. Why is AI not being adopted in AC? And then people talk about the lack of data. So how can we make this data problem accessible or solvable? Like in another
Hmm.
industry, like big tech or government funding, the people make data sets, spend money. So do you think
Yeah.
is it a funding issue, or is it an IP or client ownership issue, or is it we just like, can you give some practical solutions?
I think it's an IP issue. Honestly, that's my opinion. I mean, the reason being the fact is that the designs are owned by the client themselves. So and in the U.S., I mean, I think most firms are using AIA contracts, right, to negotiate their projects and to sign the deals with the client. So I think in this case, honestly, the onus is on the AIA as an organization to drive that change.
Mm,
And maybe it's not about transferring ownership of property from the clients to the firms. Maybe I'm not advocating for something so drastic, but just thinking about an intelligent way that you can provision these contracts to make it so that the client is still the owner of everything, but in a somewhat of an anonymous way, that this data can be used for other purposes, right? It's kind of like to make an indirect parallel. It's kind of similar to what we have in Europe with GDPR. Meaning, so for example, I can collect telemetry data from our users to help improve the product. Okay, but that data has to be completely anonymous. I am not
mm,
allowed to know who is doing what. I am simply allowed to take the information, use it for purposes of improving the product, and that's it, right? And I'm oversimplifying here, but a similar model could be something that is provided for in AIA contract documents, where the data
mm.
can be used. It's anonymous. Of course, you can opt out, but if you're not working on a government building or something really really top secret, the question would be like, what do you have to lose? Why opt out? Because if everybody opts out, then we're basically crippling ourselves in the future, and basically just resigning to not being able to leverage the full power of this technology. So, and I think that'd be a missed opportunity.
I see. That's interesting. So that would be like require someone to advocate this in AI.
I would say so. I mean, I think again, I'm being specific here to North America, but yeah, I do think so. I think that would be a really really good starting point. I mean, and the U.S. is a good market to do a test for that, because it's a large market. A lot of software firms are already there. A lot of big tech is there. A lot of interesting startups are there. Obviously, some of the biggest architecture firms and engineering firms in the world are also based there. And I think that'd be a very, very good place to give this a shot.
Yeah. You know what made me just realize, let's say an architect designed a house for their client. Current IP might not allow them to use that for training. But then there are interior designers or virtual staging or like photography companies, and they maybe share their stuff on Instagram or other media. And those media or social media platforms may anonymize and use that training. So ultimately, the people who created the data or helped in might not use it, but the downstream.
Exactly. Yeah, and it's a bit of a gray area there. I mean, look, nobody can police everything, right?
Mm,
Um, and of course, there's all kinds of different contractual situations, but I know exactly what you mean. Yeah, and it's interesting. Yeah, I mean, maybe, and there might be, you know what, there might be a startup or an experimental tech endeavor that tries to operate in that gray zone.
mm,
I don't know how far they would get because I don't know. I mean, for me, I think the more logical solution is to just do everything in an orderly and rule constrained way. But yeah, of course, you could try and live in the gray area, but I also don't know how long that area is going to stay gray for. I mean,
mm,
these days, I think you see a lot of legal activity around AI. People
yes,
are asking questions, people are raising topics that we simply don't have regulations for, right? And I think in the near future, this is going to increase, is going to continue to the point where we do have kind of a predetermined protocol about how to use or not use these things.
got it. What are your thoughts on maybe the possibility of using synthetic data?
Yeah, it's. I think in some use cases it's possible. In some cases, not so much. I'll give you a good example. I think I worked on a little project with a gentleman named Theodore Galanos a couple of years ago. I'm not sure where he's at right now professionally, but basically we're trying to create a very simple AI model that would simulate daylighting simulations, right? Because daylighting simulations, they take a long time, they're computationally intensive, it's brute force, and yet if you really think about it, it is quite rule constrained. And this was an example where synthetic data worked pretty well. Basically, what we did is we created a grasshopper algorithm to make a bunch of fake buildings, just whatever. The parameters being the length, width, and the window size and window positioning, right? And that worked pretty well because we just kind of let this run, days. It created the fake buildings. It actually did the real daylight simulation with radiance, and then we were able to train the model on that data. So that's an example where I think it works super well. But I don't know that every single use case would lend itself to that, right? Um, Nevertheless, I think there are many that would lend themselves to that, and it's always worth asking the question of would it work? Because if it would work, then we don't need to worry about all this legality and IP stuff because we've created some fake data. We are the owners of it. It's nobody's being robbed, for lack of a better word.
I see. Interesting. Yeah, yeah, Theodore is like pushing cutting edge uh, experiments in AI and AEC.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like, he is also one person I closely follow. Uh, Before I forget, I like you mentioned in the earlier question I asked about automation things you did, and you uh, shared the example of Karen. Like anything, any work you did at NBBJ regarding the automations you could share.
Yeah, we did. Well, it was a number of exciting things. I think the really exciting part about our work at NBBJ is that everything that we did was really project specific for the most part. I mean, yeah, we worked on some things like I mentioned, the Applied Science Toolkit that was meant to be applicable to a series of projects. But for me, the beauty of it was that the design computation work was really tied to the root of the project's needs. I'll give you some just the good examples off the top of my head. So the Amazon Spheres in Seattle, which is at least in the U.S. pretty well known building. Feel free to Google it if you don't know it, but that's an NBBJ project, and there were two things there that we did um, in terms of automation that were really cool. Number one, the facade. Again, if you look at this project online, you'll see images. These are glass spheres, and the facade is kind of triangulated. There's pieces of glass, right? So individually, originally, excuse me, this was an aesthetic that Amazon really wanted. Like this was just their vision, right? So we had to
Mm,
make it reality. When we first created this and we sent it for pricing, the price was absurd. I mean, even absurd for a company like Amazon. It was absolutely unfathomably expensive, right? So we said, okay, so what can we do here? And what we did was we created some automation to basically constrain the individual pieces of that glass facade. So instead of having like 1,000 unique pieces, we created an algorithm to let us toggle how many unique pieces we would allow. And then that would kind of let
Mm,
us see the geometry. So we basically tried to find a sweet spot where um, the vision that Amazon had was realized, but at the same time, we had a few enough unique pieces where the fabricators could confidently say that this is doable and it's doable within a given budget. And really, that's maybe one of the best examples I can pull out of my entire career, because without that piece of automation, that project wouldn't have happened. It wouldn't have happened. And that building today, and I think for a very long time in the future, is just an iconic part of the Seattle cityscape. It's yeah, I mean, whether you might love it, you might hate it. I know everybody's got a subjective opinion, but yeah. And another piece, I think that's I'll use that project again as an example. Again, for those that have seen it, the inside is almost like a forest, right? There's a lot of plants. It's really beautiful. Feels very unique. Um, One of the things that we had to do was to make sure that all of these plants would get the right amount of sunlight. So again, we created some technology to help us kind of create different layouts of the plantings, and to run some daylight simulations and make sure that all these different species, which have different requirements of light and whatever, that basically all the plants could thrive and grow in the way that they were laid out inside of the spheres. And again, without that project would just not exist, so I think those are some really good examples. There's so many more, but I think for me that's maybe the most interesting projects where something would not be possible had we not done solution X, Y, or Z.
that sounds pretty cool. Like, and if I get it right, is it like the script was doing the fragmenting of the sphere pieces and optimizing? Are we compromising on the curvature with the
Yeah.
number of unique pieces and costs? Nice.
Exactly, yeah, and there was even this was quite a complex script, but there was even a structural element involved because
Mm,
fragmenting, triangulating a sphere has implications also on the stress of the members that actually hold up the glass. So it wasn't just about the aesthetics and reducing the unique pieces. It was also making sure that the structure would be sufficient to hold that weight and resist the wind loads and all this stuff and this stuff, which of course was a collaboration with our engineers. But yeah, a lot of different parameters going in there to make this vision a reality.
got it. And I want to know your thoughts on accessibility for technology for our industry. What are computational designers, tool developers, thoughts for them?
Yeah, I think this is for me one of the most important and interesting things in our domain, in our niche, because I mean, easy is the wrong word, but if you're technologically savvy, it's easy to build something that works, right? And it solves a problem, and that's great. But if it just solves a problem for you, or for one use case, again, it's great, but it could be so much more. And for me, what's always been important is to figure out how do we share that technology and that power to other firms, right? Because again, I've been lucky. I worked for Kieran Timberlake, NBBJ, firms that really have the knowledge and the expertise to create these tools and to leverage them. But let's look at the reality of the entire world, the entire profession. Kieran Timberlake is not the average firm in the world. NBBJ is not the average firm in the world. If you look at AIA data, which is again just North America, but the average architecture firm in the US has 2 employees. And
Mm,
those people are not, like, they don't have the time, the knowledge, the necessary financial resources to invest in these kinds of technologies. And so the way I think about it is, if we want to drive the industry forward, we have to drive everybody forward. It can't just be like the top 1% or 5% of firms, because it's the same thing. If I look around in terms of the landscape, the average building isn't the Seattle headquarters of Amazon. The average building is not the new airport in JFK. The average building is something like probably what you and I are sitting in right now. It's either a single family home or a mixed use office building. And those are exactly the types of buildings that are being done by that average firm. So if we really want to move the industry forward, we have to make sure that everybody moves forward together. And that's really one of the things, maybe the most important thing that drew me to Andscape 3 years ago. Well, more than 3 years ago now, because that was exactly the goal of Andscape. Before visualization, rendering, it used to be reserved for people that have a lot of time and a lot of knowledge and really, really know what they're doing, which is not the average architect. And what Enscape was able to do is say, you know what, all you need to do is just click a couple of buttons. You don't need to learn a bunch of new terminology, like what is a Gaussian splat, what is, I don't know. There are a lot
Nerve.
of,
Yeah.
exactly, what is a NURB, what's the difference between a mesh and other kinds of geometry. No, you just need to have the model that you need to have anyway, because you got to produce drawings, and you just do it. And I think that level of democratization, that level of accessibility, really opens up, a lot of possibilities for people that before would have never been able to engage, a tool like that.
I see. And like, help me understand, like, what's the basic issue here? Like, for example, bigger firms have bigger projects, they have more R&D funding. Sometimes they develop internal automations and tech, and that's their marketing IP. So for addressing the fat middle or the long tail, startups maybe can do that. But often I hear it's difficult for them to make the small firms add up new tech, or there's not enough time.
Mm-hmm.
So how,
Mm-hmm.
what's the gap like?
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. I've heard similar kind of sentiments, but I think it all comes down to first principles. I mean, basically making sure that the problems that you're solving are the right ones and the most valuable ones. Because somebody in the early days of Enscape could have also said that, right?
Mm.
There's not enough TAM. We're not going to reach enough people, et cetera, et cetera. But believe it or not, if I look at our spread of customers today, the majority of our customers are actually are small firms. The vast
Mm.
majority, really. um, and it's surprising to a lot of people, but it's for me, the reasoning is because it's exactly that. We were solving the right problem and doing it in a way that everybody can access. um, because it looks intimidating, but if you tell somebody that, oh, all you have to do is this simple things, they're much more likely to join you for the journey. And to tie it back to our previous topic, I think this is exactly one of those opportunities for AI as a technology to help drive that. Because all of a sudden, a piece of software might not need a bunch of sliders and toggles and buttons. Maybe all of a sudden it's as simple as me typing in a prompt and saying, simulate what this what kind of interior daylight I'm going to get on this day of this. You know what I mean?
Mm.
Um, so yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunities there to do that, but it really it has to start with the right problem, and it has to start with the constraint that you really have to make this work for everybody, not just a select few.
I see. So what do you think is, if the adoption problem was UI UX with this natural language with AI, that could be solved?
I think that's, yeah, it's part of the problem for sure. UI
Okay.
UX is critical. It's critical, and again, if I was to look back on the last 5, 6, however many years of Enscape, I mean, one of, if not the biggest factors for success was that UX, is because always asking the question of not what could we add, but actually the opposite is what could we remove, how much is too much, and where is the line to say, like, okay, well, this is enough, this is good enough. And it sounds very simple. It sounds very easy. It's not. I promise you. I'm not a UX expert myself. That's not my domain. But there's a lot of people that spend a lot of time in answering those questions in the right way. It's much easier said than done.
I see. And what has been like a recipe that made Andscape successful serving SMB, and why don't we see more companies like Andscape or like serving that market? Yeah.
I think what's the recipe for being successful? Well, number one is kind of like I mentioned before, solving the right problem. Number two, I think a couple of decisions that the company did early on correctly was focus on the North American market, which was growing rapidly, and also focus on Revit, which at the time was expanding rapidly.
Mm,
And I think those two things really help drive adoption because I mean, we all kind of know where Revit is now in terms of market share in the North America, and Enscape was I believe either the first or maybe the second. I believe it was the first platform that was supported by Enscape, and that really that really helped it grow, I think. But to your other question, why aren't there more companies out there doing the same? I think there are. I mean, we have no shortage of competition, but in my experience, or at least in my view, everybody's focusing on a little bit different things, actually. So, I mean, I think to a user or to a customer, maybe it looks the same. You say, oh well, we have Enscape, we have Twinmotion, we have D5. They all do the same thing. Not really, though. I mean, in a way, yes, but that's like me saying, well, Microsoft Word and Microsoft Excel do the same things because I can type in letters and numbers.
mm, mhm.
I, no, I think there's more than slight differentiation between us and them. Everybody's focusing on different things, but you know what? That's not a bad thing. That's for me as an architect. That's a good thing because that means that people have choices, and they can use whatever tool is best for the job rather than being limited to something just because it's the only thing there. So no, I think there's a lot of exciting innovation going on in the space, at least in the space of design and visualization. But like we were talking about earlier, I still think there's a lot of other opportunities out there that are worth solving. Problems and questions that architects have to face daily.
I see. And I share one aha moment for me using Andscape. So back in my architecture school, for converting like Revit model to visualization, I was like exporting through Collada and like Lumia and stuff. But the thing is, when you add stuff there, it doesn't go bi-directional. Then I
Yeah.
started using Enscape, and first of all, real time and the back and forth playing with the visualization space and the 3D geometry space was like synchronous. That workflow was super productive.
Yeah, no, that's exactly a perfect example of what I was kind of addressing earlier is that they're different tools for different purposes. I mean, Lumion, I'll use that one since you it's the example that you gave. I have a lot of respect for what they've been able to do. It's a good product. Don't get me wrong, but it's exactly for that. It's a visual storytelling tool, right? And what we try to do with Enscape is make it a tool that helps you make better design decisions. So that bidirectionality is really critical because you want to be able to make changes in the design and then instantly assess if you've done the right thing or not, right? And that's really the positioning. That's at the heart of Enscape is helping you make better decisions, which make better buildings, right? As a contrast to Lumion, which in my experience is their goal is to help you tell a compelling story about a design that you've already made, right? And so for me it's completely logical that we focus on these different pieces of the workflow. Yes, in the end we both produce a rendering, but again, to me that's a very kind of a surface level interpretation of what the tools do. They really go much deeper than that, and they each have their own focuses, strengths, weaknesses. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, like for your purpose, what's the right tool to solve that problem?
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah. I see. What are your thoughts on sustainability in our industry?
I think this is, for me, the honestly the most important topic that we have to tackle in the next, um, well, I was going to say 5 years. Then I realized like this horizon is much shorter than that. We need to be addressing it ASAP, and it's not a one and done thing. This needs to be a continuous process. I mean, if you look at, globally speaking, building design and construction are responsible for 40% of global energy usage and carbon emissions, which is insane. Like, I don't know if there's any other industry that is solely responsible for that big of a chunk, really. I know a lot of people talk about, airlines and transportation. I don't have those numbers in front of me, and I believe that those would be a large chunk as well. But 40%, I mean, come on, that's almost half. That's almost
Mm,
half. So I think whoever you are in AEC, you could be an engineer, you could be an architect, you could be a builder. I think we all have a responsibility to really be proactive about answering that question, and not letting, how do I say, not positioning us in a way that decisions are made for us, but positioning us in a way that is proactive and that we can drive the future rather than letting it drive us. Because I think the latter would be a much more terrifying outcome, to be fully honest. So yeah, and there's a lot of, I think, exciting development in the space out there, but personally, I would say it's not enough.
mm,
We're working on some things in that space as well, which we've talked a little bit about. Um, Again, more with the focus of increasing access and democratizing the utility that these tools provide, because these are questions that I think we should be answering today, and I think the future isn't far away where we will be required to answer them. It doesn't matter what part of the world you live and build in, but yeah.
nice. And what do you think is the goal underlying challenge why people like we know this is super critical in still we have been talking about this for many years, and
Hmm.
what I've seen is it like an owner incentive problem where sometimes the capitalistic mindset, okay, I want more return on revenue compared to the extra money I might spend on making a building system? Is it lack of real time decision making data while you're modeling in Revit?
Yeah.
While selecting materials, you don't have enough data or right data for making decisions regarding sustainability, or is it not enough tools? Like, help us decode.
Yeah, I think, honestly, it's very similar to where the visualization process was maybe a decade ago. So what do I mean? Because so currently building performance analysis, let's look at that process. It's requires very specific knowledge, therefore it's very expensive, and it takes a lot of time because
Yeah.
of the technology, right? So what does that mean? It means that because of the cost, it's completely outside of the realm of possibility for most firms. Just completely out of the realm of possibility. Okay. So then let's look at those top 5% or 10% of firms that can afford it, or those top 5 or 10% of projects that can afford it. The process is still, it takes so long that by the time you get results, the design has already moved forward, and then you get this report 2 months later or 1 month later, but what can I do about it? The building is now completely different. And this is a shame, I think, especially because some of the biggest decisions that impact a building sustainability are made early on in the project, and the earliest phases are the quickest and cheapest. And that's really when you talk about something like building orientation, percent glazing, the things that make 80%, 70% of the difference, those happen in the beginning. Like, yeah, of course, the rest of the time we're specifying materials and this and this, and they make incremental adjustments to the performance of a building, but the big decisions happen in the front. So the process being so long, so complex, requiring so much knowledge, I think it excludes it from the arsenal of many architecture firms, and even in the ones that can afford it, it's really, most of the time, it's not actionable. Yeah. And those were exactly the constraints and the parameters that we took into account when we started building what we're working on now, which was yeah, to make sure that whatever we build can be as close to real time as possible, so that anybody can understand it. You don't need a PhD in building physics, and it can give you real time feedback that you can make decisions. Is it going to replace engineers? Absolutely not. That's not the goal. The goal is to empower architects to have more productive collaboration with the engineers and to answer a lot of the simpler questions themselves on the fly, but then to enable the engineers to focus on the more complex topics and to be able to communicate with them a lot more effectively.
I see. And if I understand it correctly, like the traditional issue has been like you make some big decisions during concept design or schematic design. For an accurate building performance analysis, you need a detailed design phase. So by the time or later phase, it's so much difficult to make the whole. So how do you technically like? Can you give an like overview? How do you technically solve this?
Well, I think there's a lot of different ways to technically solve it. I'll maybe explain a little bit about how we approached it. So we're we're working with a partner firm, and they're experts in the field of sustainability. They make solutions for engineers, right? Um, but when we kind of engaged them to work on this project together, one of the things that we asked them from the start was, okay, how can we reduce the number of inputs to the smallest number possible? And not just that, but reduce the inputs to a kind that architects understand and can engage with. And in order to enable us that level of simplification, basically what we had to do is, how do I say, is create what we call templates, but essentially, um, how do I say, reducing the complexity of a data set
Mm,
by breaking it up. So instead of having like 1,000 levels of granularity, you say, you know what, we have 10 levels of granularity. Because for an architect, that's honestly most of the time good enough. Again, we're not trying to replace the engineer. We're not trying to replace that workflow, which maybe still has to happen for certification and for legal purposes. Um, but we're trying to work with a rule of thumb rather than a super detailed and precise measurement, you
mm,
know. And okay, working with the rule of thumb maybe means you get 80% resolution instead of 100% resolution. Accuracy is still 100%, but resolution is a little bit less, and I think that's perfectly okay. Of course, you know, we'll let our customers decide and give us that feedback, but that was at least our approach, is to simplify it and, yeah, work with high level rules of thumb as opposed to really just getting into the nitty gritty and adding decimal points and going for the super fine detail and resolution of analysis.
I see. I really like the approach, and like it made me think like for this kind of downstream task automation which are required from like early stage, maybe a good approach to solve is like verticalizing the whole process and
Hmm.
capturing the inputs like I'm thinking for construction detail automation, if or in pre-construction vertical SaaS companies, if they have like set of options, then they can predict how it could impact the later stages where one option is changed.
Yeah, and I think that's a very interesting vision. I mean, it's probably not something where we're ready to get there today as an industry, but you know, I think again the limitation isn't technology. And I've said this before, even in earlier points in my career. It's like the technology isn't the limitation. The limitation is the method of collaboration in this industry. It's the way that the
Mm,
contracts are structured. It's the way that relationships are structured between owner, architect, and consultants. Because in a lot of these delivery models, unless it's something like IPD, integrated project delivery, if it's a traditional design bid build, the design team isn't really that incentivized to work together in such a close and optimized manner, which I think is a shame.
mm,
Because again, the technology, we can build this technology tomorrow. No, that's not the issue. But if the contractual models don't enable us and don't allow people to work in that way, or don't incentivize them to work in that way, it doesn't matter if the technology is there because nobody's going to use it.
mm. Yeah, because like there's a huge percentage of architects still doing CAD or AutoCAD based design or SketchUp based like non, and it made me think, is it like, is it the adoption issue, or is it like they just don't have enough time because it's like low budget product, they're running late, so it's a money issue? If they have more money, maybe they will make a BIM model.
Oh, I think it's a combination of
Mm.
factors, honestly. I mean, it's hard for me to imagine that it's a time issue because I mean, I've been in the industry long enough. My first jobs were designing and delivering buildings in AutoCAD, and towards the end of my career, it was Revit. I really cannot see how AutoCAD is faster or 2D in general. I mean, I'm not trying to badmouth AutoCAD here. I think it's a great product, but it's more about 2D versus 3D, right?
Mm.
That's really it. And I don't. It's hard for me to see a scenario where 2D really is faster than 3D. So I don't think it's the time thing. And maybe part of it could be the budget thing. I mean, sure, BIM tools do carry a bit of a premium as opposed to non BIM 3D tools, of course. Um, but I think it's also, I mean, going back to earlier topics, it's also UX. It's also, and so you start layering again, as I refer to them, these filters. You layer all these different filters. Okay, the cost. Okay, the complexity. Okay, this, and at the end, that brings us to a point where we are today, where some people just are not ready to adopt that workflow, which is, in my opinion, a shame. Because again, if we want to move the whole industry forward, we have to bring everybody along. We can't leave 50% of the people behind. It's just not, it's not going to work.
Yeah, and I definitely want to highlight what you brought. Like even for a long time, the interoperability between like the architecture model with structure like was a big issue. Like this, so much
Hmm.
data being lost. Speckle is trying to address that problem in an open source way, which is like huge amount of efforts to do that. So
Absolutely,
yeah,
absolutely, huge amount of effort, but worth it, I think.
yeah. In how does a week in your life look like?
A week in my life is it never looks the same. I'll tell you that. I do a lot of traveling to various offices, and I try to visit events as much as I can just to be able to talk to customers and learn more about what's going on in the industry and make sure we're still solving the right problems. I'm very lucky that I have a fantastic team here. Part of that team is here with me in Germany. Part of that team is in our office in Sofia, Bulgaria. But so I try to stay in touch with them as much as possible, and overall, make sure everything is going in the right direction, which is easier said than done. I think in the realities of a company as large as ours, and a portfolio of products as large as ours, the constraints are tougher and tougher to solve for. In the early days of Andscape, small amount of customers, much easier to build something that's relevant for all of them. Now, having as many customers as we do, the requests are so diverse, right? Because what, I don't know, a Gensler is asking for, the biggest architecture firm in the world, and what a one-person shop, in wherever in the world is asking for, are very different. They're very
Mm.
different feature requests, very different workflows that they have, and we have to really work hard to figure out, okay, how do we make everybody as happy as possible? How do we solve as many problems as possible? Because we can't just focus on, the biggest, but we also can't just focus on the smallest. We have to keep a balance there, and as I keep saying, try and move the whole industry forward, not just focus on this one niche. So yeah, my weeks are very diverse. I spend a lot of time talking. Let's put it this way.
Yeah, like it's challenging to strategize because if you, let's say, integrate a lot of features, a big company integrate small company might not need it, and it might create additional cognitive load in the UI where you see.
Exactly. Exactly. There's so many things, and that specific one is a challenge for us, right? Because one of the biggest USPs of Enscape is keep it simple and fast and accessible. Um, and of course, people have all kinds of things that they might want to do to the software, but if I was able to snap my fingers and add all of that, the UI, we would need to add like 100 more buttons and sliders and things. And then what does that mean for again, one of these people working in the average architecture firm? They open this up for the first time. They just want to get a quick and easy image, and then they're like completely overwhelmed, like, oh my god, what am I doing here? And that's not the goal, right? It has to be really carefully planned.
Yeah, like in architecture school, like you're taught so many software, then you have to remember so many things. So like you don't need one more software. So all right,
No, nobody does.
yeah. Is there anything which we didn't cover in this interview and you like to share the thought?
No, I think that's about it. I think maybe the last thing that I'll say is, I've mentioned a little bit about what we're doing in the realm of sustainability. So, for anybody listening, that's an Enscape or a Chaos customer, I'd say keep your eyes open. We've got some exciting things to share later this month and later this year, and we'd really love everybody's feedback because again, we want to make sure that we're building the right things that solve the biggest problems. So keep an eye out there. We're really excited about some of the stuff we're building, but yeah, we need you to help us make sure those are the right things.
So people who might be interested, do they follow the LinkedIn page of Chaos or the website for announcement?
Exactly. I would say LinkedIn page is a great place to start. We have all kinds of social media, Instagram, all that good stuff. Yeah, and our website is also a fantastic resource, chaos.com. Yeah,
All right. It was lovely hosting you, Peter. Have a amazing day.
thank you very